Today's topic is actually getting familiar with what is self-care and why it's important. Welcome to the Self-Care Diaries. This is a series where I take you along on one self-care topic to help you prioritize yourself. If you're new here, my name is Denais. I'm a therapist and mindset coach based in Dallas, Texas. I'm excited to dive in today. I feel like a lot of people preach self-care. We've seen the TikTok trends, we've seen self-care vlogs on YouTube, but no one really talks about is that self-care is a practice. Practicing self-care means taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally. We constantly have to put it into practice in order for us to make it a priority. It's not something that you do once. Self-care is vital so that we are able to tackle the stressors that we actually can't eliminate. How many of us are always thinking about the future, are always worrying about the worst possible case scenario? We're constantly trying to control things that we can't control. And self-care is part of the practice that's gonna help you lead to what I like to call radical acceptance of the situation, acceptance of what you can and can't control. One of the therapists that I look up to, Ms. Nidra Glover, she mentions how a lot of us do self-care that's more so aftercare, meaning after we feel burnt out, after we feel depleted out of our energy, to regain that, versus a preventative care, which is doing things before, putting them into practice so that we don't get to the point of burnout, we don't get to the point of feeling very depressed, and it feels even harder to prioritize self-care. Self-care is a preventative measure. It allows you to regain back your energy. It is sacred for you specifically. I grew up in a Hispanic household, and a lot of the times we didn't prioritize self-care. We prioritized being productive. We prioritized getting ourselves out of the funk. I feel like for me, it's driven the high achiever in me. It's made me accomplish a lot of things, but at the same time, it made me not prioritize rest and care because I felt like that was selfish or it was self-centered. Self-care is not self-indulgence. It is not selfish, even though it could feel like that at times. And I do believe that sometimes I could define self-care as selfish, but in a good way, in a way that helps support my overall wellness and health. And I think we throw around the word selfish. Our family has thrown around the word selfish when we prioritize ourselves, when we set boundaries. But ultimately, it is selfish because it is prioritizing ourselves in a way that helps support our other relationships. So I think it could start as selfish, but it could also have a even bigger purpose to help promote healthier relationships for you and just in a healthier overall well-being. Self-care means taking care of yourself so that you can show up feeling healthy, so that you can be well, so that you can help others, and so that you can do all the things you need and want to accomplish on a daily basis. One of the misconceptions about self-care is that it is bubble baths and face masks and skincare, and part of that is, but I don't think it's the skincare, but more so the time that you're taking in. Relax, right? That is what the self-care is. The bubble baths, the face masks, that's the activity that you chose, but the actual self-care is actually the time that you're giving to focus on yourself. And I think we miss that. We identify the activity as the self-care, but it is not. It is the intention, it is the purpose behind that activity, and that is what self-care is. It is prioritizing yourself. It is putting yourself first or giving yourself time to regain back your energy. The intentional time is what is your self-care. Some people will engage in some of these activities and still feel like they don't have energy, or they don't feel like it's actually working because either they're doing it as aftercare, meaning I'm already stressed out, I'm already anxious, so I'm gonna do the activity, versus doing the activity on the daily before it gets to the point where you're depleting your energy. When we don't practice self-care, we're not building our resiliency. We then become victims of our situation. We then feel overwhelmed and sad and all of these emotions, which are not negative emotions. I think that's also too. Self-care is also feeling all the feelings. It's being able to feel all the feelings in the spectrum. That means sadness, that means anxiety. Those are normal feelings. it doesn't become a problem until we feel like these emotions are dictating our behavior in a negative way, meaning we're dreading going to work the next day, or we want to stay in bed all day, or we don't want to eat. Like those kinds of things are when our emotions are leading our behavior in a very negative way. And so that does mean regulating our emotions, right? And regulating our emotions means practicing self-care, allowing ourselves times to feel. That could be like journaling, that could be guided meditation, that could be anything that actually prioritizes the need, right? So if we're thinking about self-care as what is your emotional need, right? If you're feeling sad, what is that emotion telling you? Is that emotion telling you maybe you need some time to just relax? If you're feeling anxious, does that mean maybe you need to slow down? What is that emotion telling you? If you feel angry, does that mean that you need something to cool down, right? You need to yell, you need to cry. If you're feeling lonely, does that mean that you need connection? Your emotions are going to give you the best indicators of what type of self-care you need that day. So if you're someone who hasn't learned how to process emotions, then I really do believe that therapy is helpful, because I, for one, didn't understand how my emotions worked, how they would dictate my behavior. I would take it down to hormones and like, it's just my hormones, it's just my period. And it wasn't that, right? Like it was far other things that I needed to learn about myself in order to practice positive self-care. Self-care is a lot of things, and one of the things we don't mention is that self-care is fucking hard. It is really hard. It's not a easy practice. Self-care is honestly sometimes doing the hard things. It's doing the hard things like creating closure, healing on your own. Sometimes we feel like, you know, all these people are not changing in our lives, and we go to therapy, and when I tell my clients, I'm like, you know, you're in therapy, not them, right? So the healing is with you, within you, and so then you're going to be able to approach that situation so differently. And that is where your power, you regain your power back, and you give yourself the ultimate self-care by creating your own closure and your own healing journey. Self-care is moving on from something that's hurt you in the past, moving on from something that has been stressing you out, moving on from something that already feels finished and doesn't feel like there's a resolution. Moving on, again, creating the closure is part of healing, it's part of self-care. Self-care is noticing that you have the power to make a different choice. We're so hard on ourselves when we make bad decisions or bad choices, but self-care is actually meaning giving yourself compassion when you maybe made a choice based on the information that you had. We're constantly telling ourselves, I could have done this, I could have done that, but honestly, you didn't have that information. You didn't have that information to make that decision. So it's important that you notice that sometimes you need to get that information, learn from that mistake if you define that as a mistake or a failure, and think about what lessons and what different choice you want to make next time. Self-care is about making healthy choices. Self-care is about forgiving others. And self-care is also about forgiving yourself. It's about being kind to yourself when you've done something that didn't feel or sit right. One of the most important things that I wanted to share about self-care is that self-care is sometimes not convenient. If you're a mom, a busy entrepreneur, a 9-to-5 gal, self-care is not always convenient when you're running a business or when you're running a household, when you're trying to level up your career. It is never convenient. There's always going to be external stressors, external factors that are going to push you from not engaging in proper self-care. If we think about self-care as a convenient thing we do, then we're thinking about it in a not realistic way, because it's not always convenient. Sometimes when I have a long day or I'm stressed out about work, I don't want to just do self-care. I may want to do scrolling on TikTok and watching a bunch of YouTube videos and not really give myself the proper self-care, which maybe is just being, right? Resting and doing the things that make me feel good. But I know that trying to look for the answer on TikTok or on YouTube is not going to be the answer sometimes. It's going to be what's distracting me from actually engaging in my self-care. there are some fundamental principles of self-care that you need to be aware of, and these are all individual principles that we all have and that we all need to work on, and that is self-reliance. That means our ability to rely on our word and be able to do the things that we say we're gonna do. There's empowerment. How do we empower ourselves to reach goals, to provide compassion, to release ourselves from the stress, from a setback, to move on? Empowerment is so important, and it's a big self-care principle. There's also autonomy to choose what's best for us. A lot of us have a hard time setting boundaries, and sometimes that takes away our autonomy of choice. And so I think it's important that we realize that, you know, we are in control of our own actions and reactions, and everything else we're not. And so we need to learn how to figure out what our own autonomy is and what our tolerance level for certain things is. Personal responsibility, and I think this is similar to self-reliance. What is your personal responsibility, and how are you really giving yourself accountable for when you are not reaching or doing the things that support your overall health? And finally, self-efficacy, the ability for you to believe that you have the capacity to reach your goals, to challenge situations that you may not have control over. Another thing we don't consider as part of self-care principles are our community involvement, our community participation. And sometimes that's hard to accomplish because we live in a world where systemic racism and social injustice makes it difficult for us to actually believe in our community, that our community is there for us. I do encourage you to find a community, a space where you feel seen and that helps support you every step of the way, because that is part of a self-care practice. Now that we know what self-care is and why it's important, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button so that you don't miss the next video. I can't wait for you to watch the next video.